Hi, and thank you for joining us for this episode of The State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond. That is Robert Hilliard. You'll see a third person here. I'll introduce her in a second. I am Whitney Wiley, and we are here on Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific, talking all things leadership. And today we have the honor and privilege of hosting our guest, Summer Watson, Dr. Summer Watson. And you're going to get to hear about her life, her leadership journey, and we're going to have a great conversation talking about energy, which is one of the pillars of the simple leadership method. So before we get started, Robert, how's it going?
It's going well. I was telling you before.
You're not convincing, Robert.
It's going well. I'm running on the vapors. I had 1 hour of sleep last night, but I'm going to make it through this interview, and it's going to be full of energy because I know how to draw it in.
You draw it in. You know what? Motion creates energy, so you could shake it out. Do a dance.
Absolutely.
Do a dance.
Absolutely.
So we have with us again, Dr. Summer Watson. I'm going to leave Robert to do the official introduction, share a little bit about her, and he will lead off the interview. But we're going to have a great conversation. You'll get to learn something about Summer and the wonderful work that she's doing. And when before we wrap up, if she's got something that she'd like to share with you, if she's got a product or something for you, we'll give her an opportunity to share that. So, Robert, take it away.
Fantastic. So let's get this party started, as they say. So, hold on one second. I'm having little technical issues here. It's my it's my lack of sleep.
Stop.
All right. Dr. Summer Watson, MHS PhD, is a high-performance coach, doctor of psychology with a clinical emphasis, podcaster, event producer, live show host, author, and military spouse of over 21 years. She is the founder of Core Women, LLC, a unique home for the hearts and souls of women. Dr. Watson's mission, most importantly, is to bring community together to share their wisdom, creativity, and expertise to help each other in their process of building successful businesses. Please welcome Dr. Summer Watson to our show.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here with the both of you. Thank you.
You're welcome. I'm excited. We were talking a little bit before the show, and I was really impressed. I first started off by saying how impressed I was by all the credentials that you have. And I was just really impressed, even more so, by your personality. So I want to thank you for being on the show.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. And I want to start out by asking you a couple of questions. And the first one is really a statement. Tell us a little bit about your journey, your work, and how you lead and lift up others.
Well, thank you for that question. So my journey started out very interestingly. And I'm going to kind of put this in a nutshell because there's a lot that has happened in 55 years. Like for most of us, yes, that's my age, 55 years old this year. So
you're still a baby.
Well, thank you for that. So, at 6 months of age, I had a life-threatening illness. So I had a hole in my small intestine. And every time my mom would take me to the doctor, they would really dismiss her. And so about the third time, 2 weeks into that, I ended up being at the doctor's office, going into a coma, and really fighting for my life for several months. And they did exploratory surgery, and they found a hole in my intestine, and I was septic. And so at that point, it was multiple surgeries. It was on for the next so many years of my life where I had surgery after surgery after surgery. So that was one thing. Wow. And that was the lead up to the beginning of resiliency, and both innate and learned, right? And so the next part of this was, after getting past that and being raised by my mom for a few years, My parents were young. They were 17 and 19 when my mom was 17 and 19 when she had my brother and I. And so then it was the parents shifted us over to our paternal grandparents. And so we lived there for a couple of years. And they were like, well, we just kind of need time to grow up and see what that's like. And then after a couple of years there, then we got shifted to my father's house, which was a little bit more difficult and challenging because it was an abusive kind of family system, right? And so that made it very challenging and scary as a child. And then at about 10, my mom came and got us, and she said, okay, this is you're with me now. And so she was remarried, and that lasted for a little while, but my stepfather's still in my life today, but she pretty much raised us as a single parent.
Mm.
And so there was a lot of changes that went on very early in life. So from about 12 to 18, it was really my mom and I, and she was a single mom. We ended up being best friends. And then I went off to college and I went to UC Berkeley. And when I went there, there was a few issues in relation to family and me being at school, which was fine, but there was some strife there in regards to what was going on at home and me having to go back and forth to take care of somebody I loved dearly. And so, and I worked full time. And so I got through that. And then I got through, right? And so today I feel like I'm in a very different place because not only am I thriving, and I choose to live my life differently than in chaos or a survival mode, and also being able to harness that energy and realize that I have always had both this innate and learned ability to be resilient. And how I pulled from that over the years, which leads me to where I am today as a coach, as somebody who mentors, as somebody who loves bringing community together, really being emotionally agile, and really having that adaptive responsiveness when change occurs in life.
That's amazing.
In a nutshell.
Yeah, it's amazing. No, it's amazing. And as you were talking about all your challenges and all the things you went through, I was really tempted to shift our questioning because we usually ask the same questions in pretty much the same sequence, and I'm going to keep them in the same sequence because I heard something else in there too. There was a lot of leadership there, and so I'd like to ask you this question. Because we're all about leadership. Our show is all about leadership, as you know. So what's your leadership philosophy and how did that come into play how did that get to be formed as you were going through all these things?
I love this question because I'm going to take it back to, early on. I think my mom, as we grew together, one of the things that she allowed me to do as a child was she gave me a lot of freedom. I grew up in California, and most parents want to hold on really tight to their children because they don't want them to make mistakes and they don't want them to get harmed, right? And my mom was really brave and courageous, and she was like, go out there, experience life, make those missteps because that's the way you're going to learn. And she was one to say, I'm not going to come and scoop you up. You're going to have to find a way to figure out how to get to the next step. If you find yourself having a misstep, there's other ways to work around that. There's other ways to work through that. And it's not as if she wasn't there. She was more like, I want you to figure this out. And if you have questions, come to me. I can tell you. Or go tap into your resources. You've got resources at school. You've got resources in me. You've got resources in those around you. And she was very serious about that. And I think I see a lot of parents that through my work over the years and today, they want to be those helicopter parents where they want to just kind of rush in, or snowplow parents and, take over. And I'm so happy she didn't, because it taught me how to get back up. And if I didn't fall and learn the steps on my own to get back up, I don't think I'd be to where I am today. I honestly don't. And some people might say, well, maybe you wouldn't have made the same. Well, I didn't make the same mistakes over and over, because here's the thing. I knew she wasn't going to rescue me. She was one of those parents that followed through on what she said. So they weren't, these false statements where she was going to come and rescue me. No, she meant what she said.
That's fantastic.
I love, there are a couple of things that you said, Summer, that just resilience, right? And having a life of resilience. But what struck me, and I dare say Robert probably would say the same thing, is that what your mother did for you was created a learning culture. Right. And and it's something that we talk about on the show a lot, the importance of allowing our, regardless of whether or not you have a title, you run a company, some huge conglomerate, a department, a family, doesn't matter where you are leading from. Right. And we talk often about titles, and you are a leader, whether you have a title or not, but creating a culture, an environment where you and the people around you, whatever your system is, whatever your organization is, where learning is the key, that it's okay to make mistakes, right? It's okay to fail. Right. And I don't really believe that there are mistakes or failure. They're just opportunities to learn. And that's what I heard, whether your mother knew she was doing that or not. That's what she did for you. And then in the environments that you create, that you do the same thing, and that you help your clients and others that you work with to do the same thing, right? It's looking at whatever experience you have, doesn't matter. Whatever experiences you have, those are opportunities to learn something for your growth, but not just for your growth, but for the other people, those that are following you, those that are watching you, right? That they can see, oh, it's not that I fall down and I stay down. If I fall down, I can get up and I can take what I learned from that and move on.
Absolutely. I love what you say there too, Whitney, because, it was kind of interesting. As I grew up, I also, as I said, I was raised by pretty much a single mom. My dad was in my life early on. And then I made the choice, the executive decision, who was going to be in my life and how much, right? And because my values with my dad may not have aligned exactly because of the way maybe he treated others. And that was something early in life that really stuck with me. I want to be kind. I want to embrace others. I want to hear what they have to say, and I don't want to bully, right? And so when I was with my dad early on, he was my soccer coach. He was my coach in a lot of different things. And when I would be playing a soccer game, and get pushed over, bullied over, and I was with predominantly boys around me, right? I had 2 brothers. I had lots of boys that I played, and he'd be like, get the heck back up. I don't care if you get rolled over, steamed over, get back up. And I always remembered that. And I did get back up. And that was a tough lesson, but it was one that I actually later on appreciated, because I wasn't intimidated by a lot, right? I may have fears like everybody else, but intimidation, no, right? And so, so I took the steps to really kind of carve out for myself whether or not I made a misstep. And I agree with you. It's never a mistake. It's opportunities for learning. So those missteps, I call them, instead of mistakes, are steps in a different direction that I can keep going forward on. I could choose to stay there, or I could step forward, right? And so some of the things that I did along my journey were the help with other people who lifted me up. And I look back on my journey and go, oh, I so thank those people. From the time that I was applying for college, and I went to my librarian to help me with my admissions essay, and she was amazing. From the time that I got into my sorority and I wanted to become sorority president, all the girls rallied around me. From the time that I got into human services and I did multiple internships, one in particular with a nonprofit, and I had two women who oversaw my counseling side, and then how to build community was the other part of that internship. And those two women, I fully believe I wouldn't be here without their mentorship. So there's so many people that I look back on today and go, I'm so thankful that somehow that energy, inviting them into my life, being open to new opportunities, embracing those opportunities. Everything might not have been roses and daisies, but I certainly put myself out there to experience those situations, those new opportunities, right? And what I call that is emotional agility, right? And so that emotional agility is that ability to navigate one's emotions in a positive way. So that means awareness, being aware of your emotions. That also means that you're being able to name that emotion, and whether good or bad, right? And or at least the way that you're feeling. And so what helped me there was, as I was going through that mentorship with those two women, and one of those mentors was overseeing how I performed as a clinician. She used to always bring out this piece of paper, and it was this piece of paper with all these different faces on it. And she'd be like, okay, tell me how you feel. Why do you feel that way? What incited this feeling? And we'd go over this ad nauseum. And I was just like, oh my gosh, am I going to have to see that paper one more time? But it was so important because it really got me in tune with my own feelings. And guess what? I was going to be in a room with either an individual, couple, or groups or community, and I needed to be able to understand how others were feeling. And if they didn't recognize their own emotions, well, maybe I could mentor them and help them as well.
I love that. And before Robert goes on with the next question or has a comment, something else you said, you talked about choices, the importance of making choices. And it is a choice to be resilient. It's a choice to be self-aware. It's a choice, right, to tap into the energies and the emotions that you are feeling. But it also takes chances, taking a chance. And this ties into something that I don't think it's something that I learned, but I heard this in a different context recently, right? It's about the choices we make and the chances we take. That's what life is and leads us to our destiny. And you talked about, your upbringing, but all of the things that you went through brought you to who you are and where you are right now. And if all of us as leaders and those of us who, for whatever reason, still don't see themselves as leaders, but particularly if you have a title in an organization, look at your life and your experiences and see how all your choices, right? The choices that you've made along the way and the different chances that you've taken along the way, taking advantage of opportunities, how they have actually led you to where you are. And then again, how you can use those leverage, which is another one of our pillars, how you can leverage that in how you mentor and guide and uplift and empower the people that are a part of your teams and your circles.
Absolutely. I fully agree. And if you were to listen to the evolution of the story that I've told, I've talked about innate and learned resiliency. I talk about values and why it was so important for me to establish my own set of values outside of those, such as my parents, caregivers, clinicians, clergy, you name it, because we've all been conditioned to a certain degree. But do we live in alignment with those same values? And it's really important to kind of piggyback on something that you said, Whitney. Yes, we have choices, but before the choice comes awareness. And that awareness is so key, because I think a lot of us tend to go through life, just keep pushing, and we push and we push, and yet we don't stop. And I think that opportunity to stop, inhale, take a breather, reflect, and be aware and be able to name how we are feeling and not bypass it, not push against it, not push through it, but to reflect and be able to understand and be aware of what it is that we're actually going through makes us stronger, more adaptable, more resilient. And so then comes, okay, are we listening to that intuition? Are we understanding that emotion that is attached to it? Because a lot of times, what do we do when we get those little hairs on the back of our neck and we think, oh, this might not be the right thing, but we're going to go for it anyway? You didn't stop. You didn't stop for the moment just to take the breather. And it's something, and I'll turn this over to you in a sec, but it's something I learned working in hospitals and mental health hospitals. Sometimes that breath to let somebody just breathe really brings down the angst, brings down the feelings of heightened emotion to be able to make a clear decision to reach that end goal, the goal that you want to reach. So that breath, give it a moment, count to 10, do some breathing exercises. And let me tell you, when you do that, you give yourself the opportunity to actually take that moment to reflect, take that moment to breathe.
There's so many goodies in there, and I'm so tempted to, because I'm getting ready to segue into challenges.
Sure.
But I'm going to give you a challenge because so many men could benefit from that. Because as men, it's like, oh, I don't feel that. We just ignore that, and it's not healthy to do that. But I think that we are socialized a lot of times to reject, especially this, I call them the softer emotions, like sadness. It's amazing. Even myself, I'll watch a sad movie and I'll feel something. I'll be like, yeah, they might take away my man card if I shed a tear during this movie. So I'm gonna hold it in, and it's not healthy to do that. So I really love the way you frame that, and I'm going to challenge you, because I think that the work you're doing would be excellent for men. I know it says core women, but get some of these, emotional people, these men here that are numb emotionally. I think that it's work that I think they would benefit from.
Well, let me tell you, Robert, I have a podcast called Core Women, right? And over the years, it was established in 2018. And over the years, many men would come to me and say, hey, Summer, can you do a Core Men? And I'm like, oh, I would love to, because here's the thing. I'm not isolating anyone, but I just wanted to create a platform for women to share their voices, to share their journeys. And so the 300th episode of Core Women was actually all about men. It was their stories. It was talking about the folks behind Core Women, both men and women. And it was exciting because I never featured any men on the Core Women podcast before. And I thought, this is my opportunity, 300 episodes in, and here I am. I get to finally feature men. This is what I'm going to do. This is what I want to do. And I thought about it for a long time. And I thought, gosh, does this go against my branding? No, it didn't. It didn't. It was all those allies of women, those men behind the scenes that were supporting me, referring other women to the show. I was like, right on. This is my opportunity to embrace the men that have been there all along my journey.
That's fantastic.
Yeah, it was amazing. And I will say, Robert, growing up, I always refer to myself as being more like a man in the professional world because I was kind of shut down emotionally because I had to go through so much things, whether or not you want to call it trauma or whatever you want to call it. I don't lean into that exactly because the more that I call it trauma, I'm creating a brain map.
Sure.
And that's finally one day in college, somebody was like, "Oh, poor you. Gosh, you have to go through that again." And or you're dealing with that at home. And I said, you know what? Stop. I said, I know that you're trying to be empathic and you're trying to understand what I'm going through. And I love that. Thank you so much. But not for me. I choose the direction of my life that I want to go. And if it means helping somebody, if it means setting stronger boundaries, if it means doing A, B, or C, these are the choices that I'm making. And it's no longer for me. This is my life. And it's going to look, and my vision for it is going to look the way I want it to look. And so I didn't want to take on that poor me stuff anymore because guess what? I didn't have to claim ownership over somebody else's choices.
That's fantastic. That's fantastic.
So
So let's talk a little bit, thank you for rising to my challenge. And so
sure.
let's talk about challenges. So you talked a little bit about that in the very beginning, but I want us to really dig into that a little bit. So what challenges did you face along the way and how did that shape your work?
Well, okay. So I will say that a major challenge, and I do get a little bit of emotional about this, was when I was living with my grandparents and my father. Culturally, from a Filipino Hispanic background, the men are treated very differently than the women many times, and also there was an acceptance of certain types of behavior towards women, right? And so for me to overcome that, I was a young child looking at that, and I was just so different. And I think my grandmother and my dad recognized that really early on, whereas I'd be sitting around and I'd be like, I'm bored. I just want to learn. And, my grandfather, on the other hand, would go, Mahitha, you will learn, you will go to school, you will do this, you will do that. It's just going to take a little bit of time. And I'm like, I'm just so bored. And I think they knew that, but they were like, why can't she just be okay with just sitting here in front of the TV, right? And I just wasn't. And I think that was a challenge for me. I think that culturally there were some challenges for me about what their expectations were between a man and a woman, or a young boy and a girl. And they were very different. My grandmother's like, no, we all make the beds. The women make the beds. The women do the dishes, and I'm like, nah, that's not how I see it. There's equality here. And even from a young age. Mm-hmm. And so I was pushing against their norms. And they weren't the same as mine. And it came at a very young age. And when I went to live with my dad and watching him treat the way he treated women, not okay. It wasn't okay by me. And watching him cause harm, or, it just wasn't fun. It wasn't fine. And I just, even at such a young age, before I was 10, I recognized my values were so different. And I just wanted to escape that. And I remember in the 3rd or 4th grade, I was a really good student, and I began to fail. I saw myself shutting down and daydreaming a lot. And my dad got mad at me and he goes, what are you doing? Like, what's happening to you? Why are you letting this happen? And I'm like, I thought to myself, I can't even tell him he's the cause of this. Right. And yet I knew I had to snap out of it, because otherwise there would be repercussions to that. Right. And so that was a challenge. And I was really thankful when my mom came and got us, because I was like, so hard that we were so out of sync culturally, so out of sync in our values, so out of sync in regards to the way that he thought was a reasonable to raise children, and none of that. And so I think that really, from an early stage, pointed me in the direction of health and human services, being able to help children and families in a different way in a social service setting, and how strongly and how passionate I was about that, because I didn't want to see other people go through that, right? And so I didn't know where it was that I could help them, but I knew that by getting a master's, by getting a doctorate, by working in the field, by growing large collaborations to help reduce abuse and neglect, to help reduce recidivism with kids who were part of gangs. I mean, all these things, and building these huge county collaborations and programs really fulfilled me. It fulfilled me because now I was able to build these programs that were going to help nurture, take care of, guard, children, and hopefully guide these families and model and mentor them in a different way.
That's amazing. Whitney, you have anything to add to that?
No, I'm sitting here in awe.
Yeah.
Again, it's like the resilience that just jumps out at me, and regardless of the obstacles, in the end, it was about your choices, and so.
It was about my choices, but I will say, Whitney, that it was also about my emotions. There was a point where I was going into, and this is why I really target emotional agility and adaptive responsiveness. How do we adapt to a certain situation? How do we move through it with more grace and flexibility when we are, in fact, encountering challenges, right? And what's our strategy? So everything you talk about in leadership regarding vision, mission, values, strategy, it's all here, right? And it's here from a personal perspective. And then I took it and I thought, how do I apply it to a business? But before I get there, let me take it back to my master's degree. And this is where the emotional part comes in, because I believe that before that time in my life, I was a bit guarded, right? And I was tough, and I was going to work through everything, and I was going to plow through it, and I was going to get through it. And that's great. But I realized that I wasn't really embracing all the emotions. I wasn't doing it because there was a block. There was a wall that I had created to protect myself. And I think many of us, we all encounter something, right? Whether or not, and it's funny because I've worked in the human services field and the mental health field for so long, but when people say, oh, there's nothing, I have nothing in my background. Yeah, okay. And I don't want to impose it, but we just haven't gotten there yet. We haven't broken down those walls, right? And so that's what I had to do with myself. I thought to myself, if I'm going to ask somebody to sit across the other table or sit around a table with me to talk about a program, to talk about a social service, to talk about themselves, I need to be able to do it too. And I need to be able to work through these emotions. I need to be able to be aware of what these emotions are, what to call it, what to name it, how to embrace it, and how to be okay with what I went through and take away from it the lessons and what I want to apply to, again, my next steps. Right. And so I had to do a lot of work. So that 13-month master's degree program in human services with a specialty in counseling was my work on top of learning more from my mentors. So let me tell you, as I went through these steps and I went through working with people, they would call me on certain things. They would ask me certain things. They would dig deeper, and I would have to dig deep with them. So that's what, when I talk about leadership, when I talk about working with groups, whether they're companies, whether they're individuals or couples or groups, I dig a little deeper. We get to the core. We get to the why. Why is this vision important for you? Why are these values important for you? What are your pillars and why are they important to you? And then how are you unfolding these and allowing them to speak for you? Because guess what? Your marketing, your branding, all of that is incorporated into all of those things. For example, when I recently, a couple months ago, actually went to the FBI Academy because my husband was doing some overseeing of courses there. And as he showed me and we pulled up to the front door, they had their guiding principles, their values there. right on the front door. And I was like, that's what it's about. Like, they stand for that. You can go back and you read their mission statement. It's all about those principles, right? And what they do, it speaks for itself. And I'm like, yes, I love that. That's why also as a military spouse, love being on military base, because they're going to tell you about their guiding principles, and they're dated back in history. And yes, they've had to rework some of these things, but they go back to them and they challenge them and they rework the message as needed to grow with the changes that are happening in the industry, the economy, with the profession, so to speak. So in leadership. So there's been a lot of changes. And I think that we as a society have adapted, but we can even take it a little bit further. So, and I think one of those things, or actually two of those things, is being more emotionally agile and being able to adapt and respond differently today.
That's
I love
great.
that.
That's
I
great.
love that. I want to just say, encapsulate this doesn't necessarily require response, but you were talking about taking from the personal to help develop the business, right? And it just reminds me of I don't know, a mantra. I don't know what to call it, but my thought is when we are better, right? And looking at your core about emotional agility, the adaptiveness and responsiveness, being aware and being able to name the emotions. When we are better, we can lead better. And being a better leader really comes down to being a better person, the best person you can be, right? Taking into account all of the data that comes along, the information, the feedback that comes from your life, your choices, the things that you do, the decisions that you make, what you think and believe, etc., right? Helps you to become the best leader that you can be. So be the best person you can be, helps you to be the best leader you can be. So
yes. And I believe that, and one of the things I truly believe is do no harm. Try not to do harm to others, right? And part of that is being more emotionally aware, being more emotionally agile, being able to respond effectively, being a better listener. And I know we use this a lot about being effective listeners and like nodding and then regurgitating back what somebody's saying. No, it's about connection.
yes.
How are you making the connection with your community? Because when you lay that foundation of connection, guess what? Everything rolls in to place a lot easier. I'm not saying that it's going to be easy, but it is more smooth. And I went into multiple schools doing IEPs, SSTs, 504 plans, sitting on teams, and every single school was different when I started doing that. And guess what? When I started learning the culture of that school, their values, because from school to school they were different. Guess what? It made it a lot easier, a lot more fluid to work with the different teams, the different administration. When I went into community and started building these huge, countywide programs, bringing people to the table, listening, being empathic, being more aware, being open to the changes, being open to the suggestions. Guess what? We grew a lot faster together. So I don't care if it's community, if it's a company, a business, a small to medium to large business, your community matters. How are you connecting with your community? What ways? What's your plan? What's your strategy? And I don't mean strategy in a technical sense, but are you out there connecting with your community? Are you getting to know who you're actually working with and who's working for you, and how you're promoting one another, how that relationship is reciprocal? Because when you have a better awareness of that, things fall into place and your liabilities reduced, your retention is up. There's so much that goes along with it. And I will say, mentorship and leadership together make a huge impact.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And, like I said, when you talk, I always refer to what you say as goodies. There's so many things in there because there's so many paths we can go on and talk about. Maybe we should start having two-part interviews, Whitney. But I wanna just touch on something that you said earlier, because I think it's really important, and it's right in line with the questioning that we ask, and it's really about challenges that women face as leaders. So I'm going to ask you that question. What additional challenges, if any, and we say if any, but we know there are additional challenges. So what additional challenges do women face as leaders, particularly in your field?
So I consider myself coming from a clinical mental health field as well as a leadership building, businesses field. And I would say through the evolution of all that and building, what I have today, there have been a lot of challenges. I grew up in the 80s. So we grew up with movies like Working Girl, Baby Boom. And even historically, if you look at the challenges of women, right? Having checking accounts, credit cards, being able to do A, B, or C. There was a lot of ownership over who we are and how we were able to function. And that ownership didn't always belong here.
Mm.
So we had to struggle, and we came up with terms such as breaking the glass ceiling, finding a place at the table.
Mm.
And there were only so many of us invited at that time. So I believe that as we've evolved, we've made our own tables. But I also think that some of the things that were holding us back, which still hold us back, because as I have interviewed over 300 women, I still hear the same things that we're dealing with today, such as, why aren't we allies as women? Could we do a better job? Why are we constantly in competition? And I think many times I'm like, wow, why am I still hearing this stuff? And yet there's some flavor still to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so those are some of the things that I felt like through the evolution of my career, those are some of the things that I went through. As a matter of fact, as early as high school, when I worked at a retail business, a popular one, I was down folding some clothes, and some lady, my boss, came up to me and she patted me on the head and she said, "Way to go, Tonto." And I was just like, what? Are you kidding me? Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay. So how was I going to respond to that? Right? What did that look like for me? And from a very early age, right? And so, and even in my own, at college, when I was doing something, one of the leaders of the group, one of the organizations that I was with, she asked me, what's your racial background? And I told her, and she's like, "Oh, Armenian, no wonder you're so pretty." Out of everything that I am.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just like all these little things that could get me down. I was like, how do I move through them? How do I not stay in a place where either I'm angry, confused, I'm disgruntled? Like, no, that wasn't going to hold me back, because I said to myself, and here's that inner language, that inner talk, right? How do I move forward? How do I model better behavior? How do I lift other women up? So as I progressed through my career and in my life, my focus is, how do I lift other people up in community? How do I bring them together? And let me touch on one last thing here, Robert and Whitney. So recently I had the honor of going to a friend's TEDx in Boston, at Boston University. And I was sitting there and I was watching all these people stand on that red dot and talk about A, B, or C. And I was like, oh my God, I'm so proud of these people. And the tissue and the tears were rolling. And I was like, oh my gosh, how can I help these people get to where they want to go? So I introduced myself to the different speakers afterwards. And there was this young gentleman, and his story is phenomenal. He had 9 brothers and sisters that went into the system. And he was 2 that were taken into a foster home, and they adopted him, and he was adopted by what he called the All-American family. And he's at Boston University going to law school now. And I just wanted to connect with him. And I thought, how can I help you? How can I get more mentors for you in your process? Is that if this is something you want, I'd be happy to be there for you. And I said that to many of the women and the men there. And so I've been getting him on syndicated radio shows, podcasts, and all these different things, just because I want to be a mentor to others. I want to help lift them up. There's a woman, her name is Ebony, and she's an entertainer. She is a lawyer. She's just so amazing. And I saw her at a women's seminar, and it was about 5 or 6, 7 years ago. And Queen Latifah was actually the host. Mm-hmm. And she said, and I remember her distinctly, and I loved what she said. Her mother used to say, why are you training all these other young women to come and take your place? And she said, because Mom, guess what? At some point, they are going to take my place. And guess what we want to do? We want to make them into the most richest, emotionally wise, personality wise, well-grounded individuals that are coming up the ranks. That's why I'm doing and I was like, Ebony K. Williams is her name. And she's amazing. I loved when she said that. And I was like, yes, that's exactly why we're doing what we're doing here today. So
fantastic. I was going to write that down, but I realized, hey, we're recording this, so I don't have to. So I was like looking for my pen. This has been fantastic. I do have one last question for you before we wrap things up. And it's about energy, something that I've been really you've been giving me a lot, so I really appreciate that. So one of the guiding principles of our leadership program is energy. So I want to ask you, how does that factor in your mission and the work you do as a leader?
So if you look at the name of my business, CORE, and it starts with a K, it's how we kinetically connect, how we organically learn from one another, how we empower each other to promote change. Did I miss one? I think KOR. Yeah. And so it's like CORE, empower. So kinetically connect, organically learn from one another, reshape our lives through diverse interaction, and then empower each other to promote change. And I believe that all of that has such strong energy. And kinetics is energy. Mm-hmm. That in itself is energy. The K, it starts, right? And so as it flows through CORE, the core of us, everything is about the energy that we're putting into it, that we choose to put into it, what kind of energy, right? And so every day we have this great ability to start our day to end our evening with this incredible energy where we have this internal dialogue. And I believe that there's certain things that come from within and certain things that and that's innate versus learned, right? And so that energy, you hold in a lot of that great energy, but what are you putting that energy towards? How are you cultivating that energy? How is that energy swirling in your brain, in your body? What does that look like? And more importantly, what does that feel like? And are you paying attention to that? And so that when you talk about energy, what are you putting your energy towards? And are you aware of how you are offering that energy into the world?
That's phenomenal. Whitney, do you have anything to add to that?
I'm listening to you, and just the talk about the flow, right? And thinking about what happens to energy when it doesn't flow, right? When you think about things that don't flow, rivers that don't flow, they get stagnant. If the same thing happens when we hold on to that. And the analogy or the story that you tell about Ebony, right? When we hold on to something because we approach life with a zero-sum game, right? If I help someone else, it's going to keep me from right. That's us holding on to energy, to emotions, and not letting it flow. And it actually grows, it multiplies, it is exponential, actually, in its growth when we share, when we let it flow, energy, emotions, knowledge, wisdom, etc., rather than holding on to it. Because when we hold on to things, we stagnate, and it creates inflammation in your joints, and you don't get to walk well. So I'm just
It certainly does, and then some.
Yeah, that's the least of it, right?
Right. It creates so many blocks, right?
Yeah.
And so I love what you said there. Thank you.
That's fantastic.
so.
Yeah.
All right. Well, with that, we have reached the end of our time together. At Summer, you
This has been
just
fantastic.
such a wealth of knowledge, and really appreciate you sharing your story, the lessons that you've learned, and the work that you're doing to help other people, to help families and communities. And so, do you have anything that you're working on or that you would like to share with the audience? And then also how someone could get in touch with you if they wanted to work with you.
Absolutely. So I am working on some things. I'm working on a new program that I will be announcing shortly. So pay attention to my website at corewomen.com. There's that. I am making a physical move from the DC area back to California, which is my home of origin. I've been out of it for about 10 plus years now. And I'm looking at potentially looking at something politically, a political potential move, and doing something really unique. And something that I've always wanted to do is run for some type of political office. So looking at setting down some roots, and then getting a running start. I'm already starting to build a community there, and we'll see what happens.
That is so cool. That might be my entree back into politics. It could be helpful to you in that.
I would love it. I would love it, because in that particular area, there needs to be a little bit of a shakeup, and I'm ready for it. I'm ready to do it, and I'm excited.
That is so cool. That is so cool. Well, again, thank you for joining us. Where can they find your podcast?
You can find it on any podcast platform. It's called Core Women, the Core Women Podcast. That's KORE Women. And it's everywhere. So it's on YouTube, it's on Apple, Google, you name it. It's been around since 2018. So just go look up the Core Women Podcast. And you can also find it on my website at corewomen.com/podcast.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for being a guest here today and sharing your life, your lessons, and experiences. Robert.
Moi.
Yes, you. Yes, you. So we are at the end of our time together, and I know this episode wasn't about us, but in case someone wanted to get in touch with you, how would they go about doing that?
They can reach out to me at inspireme@roberthilliardcoaching.com, or you can just go to the website, Robert Hilliard Coaching, and fill out the contact form. Tell me what goals you have, what challenges you're experiencing, and we can set up a time when we can talk about it.
Awesome. And then if you want to reach out to me, you can reach out at shiftingintoaction.now.site, shiftingintoaction.now.site. If there is a topic that you would like for us to cover here on the State of Leadership, Simple and Beyond, please reach out to Robert or I. Let us know, and we will work it in. And if you're interested in being a guest, like Summer, right? If you want to be a guest like Dr. Summer, please reach out. Let us know. We would love to have you on the program. And so we are here Thursdays, 3 p.m. Eastern, 12 noon Pacific. And until next time, take care.
Bye now.